said you shouldn't do it. So I don't think it is right to accuse me of doing something wrong. I had no participation in any wrongdoing with regard to influencing this campaign improperly.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Attorney General. You didn't do anything wrong in that testimony. This question was jarbled. That's just not giving you any benefit of the doubt at all to do what these guys are doing to you. So I hear what you're saying, and you didn't do anything wrong there. I do want to talk to you about your recusal from the Russian case. You cited 28 CFR 445.2, saying you were involved with the campaign that triggered recusal. However, that regulation only applies to criminal prosecutions or investigations. When you recused yourself under James Comey's admission, that was a counterintelligence investigation, not a criminal investigation. So why did you cite that regulation to recuse from a counterintelligence investigation when its only applicability is for a criminal investigation?
I'm not sure that was expressed to me when I was giving advice about it in those terms, number one. Number two, it could likely be interpreted as both. And so I felt...
Comey, after you recused, he testified March 20th. He said, I'm authorized to say there's a counterintelligence investigation. He was telling the president, you're not under investigation. So that's what he said. So I think that may have been misapplied, but I understand what you're saying.
I did follow the advice I was given.
I know you did. You've talked about you can't confirm or deny investigations. I think that's a good policy. Why was Comey allowed to confirm that investigation in March 20th, which invited all kinds of irresponsible speculation? You were recused. Somebody in the department authorized him to do that. Why did they break with the policy?
This was this March 20th you're talking about? I'm not, I don't recall how that exactly occurred, but I do agree with you, Congressman, that Mr. Comey talked more than he should. And he had no power, right, or justification in announcing the conclusion of a criminal investigation. He was the investigator, not the
I agree. I don't want to, sorry to interrupt. I got limited time. I agree with you. Let me move on. Uranium One case. I know you've been asked about it. Can you say, forget about whether it's under investigation, in the past, did the FBI or DOJ inform either President Obama, Secretary Clinton, or any cabinet secretary that it had uncovered evidence that Rosatom's main U.S. executive, Vadim Mikirin, was engaged in bribery, kickbacks, and money laundering before the Obama administration approved the Uranium One sale in 2010?
Is that the Mikirin matter, the matter that was prosecuted in Maryland?
2014, but there was an informant in 2009, 2010. The FBI had evidence of bribery, kickbacks, and money laundering. Was that information conveyed to any of the relative people on the CFIUS board? Clinton, other cabinet secretaries, or was it given to the president?
The way I understand that matter is that the case in which Mr. Mikirin was convicted was not connected to the CFIUS problem that occurred 2 to 3 years before. When the case came to the United States Attorney's Office, Mr. Rosenstein's office in Maryland, CFIUS had already been approved by 2 years or more.
There was an FBI informant starting in 2009.
Well, I have not talked with him, but the Department of Justice, I understand, has approved him providing information to the Congress. And I understand it'll be set up in a few days, and you'll be able to hear from him direct.
I think you should too, because from everything I've been proffered, he has evidence of illegal conduct 2009 and 2010 before this deal was agreed to involving Uranium One. It was all connected, and so I think that's something that we need to do. And let me move on. The leaking you mentioned, you can't confirm or deny the existence of the leaks. Michael Flynn, some of these other leaks used politically against the administration. So let me ask you this. Since the president was elected, has anybody been held accountable criminally or administratively for leaking information against the administration with a political motive?
Well, I think the individual in Georgia had a motive that's been charged, we have 27 ongoing investigations. Some of those involve leaks before President Trump took office and some after.
Final question, just yes or no?
Before that, there was only 3 per year, only 9. There's 3 times as many this year as in the entire 3 years before being investigated.
Final question, why can't you just tell us whether or not the FBI expended resources to give money to Christopher Steele? It's not about going into the investigation. We have oversight over your department. Were taxpayer dollars used to give to Christopher Steele, yes or no?
I'm not able to do that. I think for several reasons. It's an ongoing matter, and also it may well involve classified information.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize in advance, Mr. Attorney General. I'm going to try to go through some questions quickly. Multiple trustworthy reports revealed last week that the Justice Department may require AT&T to sell CNN, among other assets, as a requirement for the approval of its proposed acquisition of Time Warner. Subsequently, more reports have surfaced that Rupert Murdoch, the chairman of 21st Century Fox and a confidant of President Trump, has twice contacted AT&T in an effort to buy CNN. This is, of course, very disturbing to those of us that are responsible for oversight of these issues. And my first question is, has any White House employee or official, including the president, contacted the Justice Department regarding the AT&T Time Warner transaction or any other transaction?
I'm not able to comment on conversations or communications the Department of Justice top people have with top people at the White House.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask the witness be directed to answer the question. Either you're invoking the Fifth Amendment or you're invoking executive privilege. You just can't decline to answer because it's uncomfortable. So I'd ask, Mr. Chairman, that the witness be directed to answer my question.
The witness can answer the question in the fashion that he has determined.
Well, reserving my right, Mr. Chairman, I'll move on. Mr. Sessions, are you not going to answer the question? Whether any White House officials have attempted to interfere or speak to the Justice Department about this transaction?
According to long-standing Department of Justice policy, the Department of Justice does not reveal privileged conversations
or
reclaiming
my time then, Mr.
between
Sessions.
the White House.
I'm going to move on to a new area. The Foreign Agents Registration Act, you're familiar with it?
Right.
You think it's good policy?
I think it's a good law.
You enforce it, correct?
It has value, yes.
In addition to Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn, have any other Trump campaign advisors or senior administration officials lobbied for foreign governments without disclosing it under the Foreign Agent Registrations Act?
I'm not able to comment on that.
Why not?
Repeat the question. Perhaps I misunderstood it.
In addition to Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn, have any Trump campaign advisors or senior administration officials lobbied for foreign governments without disclosing it under the Foreign Agent Registration Act?
That would be a matter that should be directed to Mr. Mueller, I believe.
Moving to a new question. On October 6th, the Department of Justice, actually you, on the behalf of the Department of Justice, issued a 25-page memo to all federal agencies purporting to provide guidance on religious liberty protections under federal law. In the guidance, you indicate that an exemption or accommodation for religious organizations from anti-discrimination law might be required even where Congress has not expressly exempted religious organizations. You remember that, right?
Yes.
Okay. Would that mean, under your interpretation, that an employee of FEMA could refuse to provide disaster assistance to an unmarried couple who live together based on the employee's religious belief that men and women should not cohabitate before marriage?
I don't believe that it could be interpreted that way. It's just a policy document. We didn't try to write it.
I really like.
Well, you have to answer.
This is a yes or no. Would the guidance you provided permit a HUD-funded shelter to refuse to house an unmarried pregnant woman based on the grant recipient's belief that sex outside of marriage is a sin? Yes or no?
Every matter, first, I don't think so, number one, under the guidance, but also the guidance does not repeal established laws that are in place, and it was written, that guidance was to clarify the established
Thank
principles
you,
of
Mr. Sessions.
religious
I have very limited
freedom.
time. I appreciate your answer.
Well,
Now,
thank
returning to the Papadopoulos issue. In your October 18th testimony, you purport to have forgotten this conversation by Mr. Papadopoulos about Russia that you put an end to. You said you weren't being dishonest, you weren't making a false statement, you simply forgot it. You remember that testimony?
Something like that,
Okay.
yes.
When did you remember the remarks of Mr. Papadopoulos? When did that memory come back to you?
I think it was when the press came up with it, or it was revealed in the press.
That was the first time you remembered it.
I would recall that my October statements was a broad question.
No, I understand. Mr.
And
Sessions,
that
I have a
it,
limited time reclaiming
this
my
event
time. You
occurred
were a
over-
senior, Mr. Sessions, you were a
It was
senior
over 18
campaign
months
official
before.
and a member of the national security team. Did you ever exchange any email, text message, or any other communication to or from Mr. Papadopoulos about Russia or any other subject?
Repeat the category list of things.
Exchange any email, text message, or any communication to or from Mr. Papadopoulos about any subject?
I do not believe so. I'm confident.
Did
I did not.
Did anybody ever forward to you a communication from Mr. Papadopoulos?
I don't recall it.
Did anybody from the campaign ever communicate with you about Mr. Papadopoulos?
I can't say that there were no conversations about him before or after this event.
Were you told
I
about the
did push
content?
back at
Time
him.
of the gentleman has expired. The witness can answer the question. Chair.
I don't have a specific recollection, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask to make a unanimous consent request. I would ask unanimous consent to insert the following materials into the record. A letter from me and Ranking Member Conyers requesting a hearing on the President's interference with antitrust enforcement matters before the Justice Department. A letter from Senators Amy Klobuchar, Dianne Feinstein, and several others to the Justice Department urging it to oppose any attempt by the White House to interfere with antitrust laws, enforcement decisions, particularly for political reasons. A July article in the New York Times reporting that senior White House advisors have discussed using the AT&T Time Warner merger as a potential point of leverage over CNN, and 9 letters from as far back as February of this year from various members of the Judiciary Committee seeking information on a wide range of subjects addressed to the Attorney General of the United States that have been ignored, that we have received no response from. I ask those
Without objection, the document made part of the record. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Ratcliffe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, good to see you. If FBI Director Chris Wray held a press conference tomorrow without your knowledge to announce a charging decision in a major federal investigation, would you consider that an inappropriate departure from longstanding Department of Justice and FBI policy?
Under the situation today, under the letter that Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein wrote with regard to Mr. Comey, I think it would be a terminatable offense.
And to your-
That's not discipline. We need to be disciplined in this department. We don't need to be leaking, and we don't need to have people taking actions outside their realm. Maybe sometimes people make an honest mistake, but that would be a very dramatic thing, which he would never do.
So I'll take that as an emphatic yes. Now, to your knowledge, are there currently federal prosecutors in your office that are predetermining cases prior to the interviewing of key witnesses to include the subjects or targets of those investigations?
I don't believe so.
Is it a practice in your Department of Justice to allow immunized witnesses to sit in the interviews of the subject or target of federal investigations?
That would not be a normal process, for sure.
Mr. Attorney General, these are just a few of the irregularities or anomalies that have taken place in how the Department of Justice and the FBI have handled these investigations and prosecutions prior to 2016, and now apparently a departure from how you're handling them. It's also these irregularities that have shaken the faith and trust of people in our Department of Justice. Look, I'm of the opinion that for the last 8 years, we have survived the worst presidency of my lifetime. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have spent their time today trying to convince you that we have to survive a bad president right now. That's okay. For 240 years, our republic has withstood that. Elected officials come and go. But right now, where we are, and what our history won't tell us, is what happens to our republic if people lose all faith and trust in the Department of Justice and the FBI to fairly investigate and to prosecute violations of the rule of law. Now, at one point in time, you and I held the same position in the Department of Justice. I was U.S. Attorney, as were you. You've obviously been promoted. If public opinion polls tell us anything, the chair that I hold right now signals that I've been demoted. But my time as U.S. Attorney taught me something that you said in your opening, which is that the Department of Justice must always transcend politics to uphold the rule of law. I think more than anything else, what the American people want to hear from you today is that that is in fact the case. As Mr. Gowdy said in his line of questioning, Lady Justice is supposed to be holding a set of scales, wearing a blindfold. She's not supposed to have her finger on the scales. And I think that the American people have every reason to question whether or not that's where we are right now. So more than anything else, what I'm asking from you is to hear from you that you are prepared, that you are committed to go wherever the facts and evidence lead you, regardless of the political consequences for any political party or any person, to include Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or yourself.
Yes, I am, and the Department of Justice is. You will soon have Director Wray, I believe, coming before your committee. I hope you'll ask him these questions, and I think you'll be impressed with his commitment in that regard. As United States attorneys, we were raised in that idea. I've never forgotten. I'm glad I had my 15 years in the Department of Justice before I came to Congress. You get your values shaped maybe at a younger age, but I think I understand the role I have, the responsibility we have to do justice. And I would say this, that in the long run, if I want the respect of this body, both sides of the aisle, I've got to follow the rules in the department. And it may frustrate you that I can't answer questions or confirm you or other members on this side. It may frustrate people on this side. But if I'm not prepared to do that, then I don't think I'll ever restore the Department of Justice. And that's what our goal would be, to hopefully it's not as bad as you say, but I think there's danger out there and we want to fix it.
Mr. Attorney General, thank you for your continued service. I yield back.
The chair would advise members of the committee that there are about 8.5 minutes remaining in this vote. The gentleman from California has persuaded me that will permit him to proceed. But other members are advised we will reconvene immediately following this vote series. And the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for appearing, Mr. Attorney General, and please express my gratitude to the men and women who serve the Department of Justice. You stated in your opening statement that my story has never changed, but Mr. Attorney General, it has changed 3 times, and today we heard the third edition when you told us that you do now recall Mr. Papadopoulos mentioning that he had contacts in Russia. And so I have a slide for you that I'd like to display. It's a January 10th, 2017 exchange with Senator Franken, where he asks about campaign communications with Russia. And you stated, Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of these activities. Mr. Attorney General, if you were asked that question today, recalling that you are now aware of what Mr. Papadopoulos said on March 31st, would you answer that question differently?
All I would say to you, Congressman, is if you fairly treat the exchange I had with Senator Franken, I think you can understand where when I answered the question, I felt like I was answering it properly.
But you would agree today it should be answered differently if it was asked in the same form today, considering your recollection that you just gave us.
I believe that you're asking me today, explicitly, did you meet with any other Russians?
Today,
I am prepared to say I did. I met with the ambassador in my office with at least 2 of my staff, senior respected patriots, colonels retired in the Army.
And Mr. Attorney
nothing
General,
improper occurred at all.
Once and for all, can we answer the
I
question.
am once and for all answering the question,
Well,
Congressman. I don't understand why you won't take my answer.
Well, we're on the third edition, Mr. Attorney General. So during your time on the campaign, did any person on earth state that they were communicating with Russians, traveling to Russia, or asked the campaign to meet with Russians, to your recollection?
Was I asked that question?
No, I'm asking you today, to your knowledge, did any person on the campaign tell you they were going to Russia?
I'm prepared to answer the question, but I just will not answer it in a way that suggests that I in any way intentionally misled anyone when I answered the question.
What's the answer to the question, Mr. Attorney General?
The answer is I met with the ambassador in my office for less than an hour, I believe, and he came up to me after a speech at the convention when it was raised to me that this months later. Nobody said immediately it was an error. By press, I immediately revealed and acknowledged, told them the meetings I'd had.
With respect to Carter Page, he told you, as you just acknowledged, that he was going to Russia. He was also on the national security team, and this is the second person within about 3 months now that is bringing up Russian contacts. And you did not tell him to not go to Russia. Is that correct?
No, I didn't tell him not to go to Russia.
And you didn't tell anyone else on the campaign that he had told you that?
I don't recall him saying that, but am I supposed to stop him from taking a trip?
Well, at that point, did you think that now that two people have talked about either going to Russia or having contacts with Russia, that the campaign where you were the chairman of the national security team might have a Russia problem?
Well, if I read what's been said about the Papadopoulos meeting, the one that was somewhat earlier than that, I did say you don't represent something to that. I pushed back at his trip and was concerned that he not go off somewhere pretending to represent the Trump campaign. He had no authority for that. This young man didn't have any ability and ought not to be going off representing the campaign.
Mr. Attorney General,
the next one is Carter Page, and he says, from what I see in his testimony, interviews, he said after the meeting was over, he goes out and
moving on, Mr. Attorney General.
He goes out and he says he's going to Russia. I made no response.
CIA Director Pompeo has called.
So what does that mean?
Well, the American people will judge that.
I don't think it means that I've done anything dishonest.
Mr. Attorney General, the CIA Director has judged that WikiLeaks is a hostile, non-state intelligence service. Do you agree?
I'm not able to disagree with that.
But candidate Trump, who you were working for...
He's more aware of its activities, perhaps, than I.
But candidate Trump said throughout the campaign, I love WikiLeaks. Do you love WikiLeaks, Mr. Attorney General?
I'm not a fan of WikiLeaks.
Do you think it was appropriate that Donald Trump Jr. communicated with WikiLeaks during the course of the campaign?
I'm not able to make a judgment about that.
Thank you again for...
Time, gentlemen, has expired. The committee will stand in recess until immediately after this vote.
And as they take a break in this hearing with Attorney General